Okay, we're now recording. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Kerr. I work with Maryland Department of the Environment in the Waste Diversion Division, and one of my duties is implementing Maryland's new food diversion law that was signed in 2021. This law requires certain businesses in the state to divert any kind of food residuals from disposal in a landfill or incinerator, and instead divert that food waste either to donation or feeding animals, or what we're going to talk about today, which is organics recycling, specifically composting. Maryland Department of the Environment handles permitting of large composting facilities in the state, and we encourage people to learn more about composting and perhaps try composting themselves at home like I do. I live in Baltimore City, and my backyard is about the size of somebody's patio, but I still am able to compost in my backyard in a tumbler composter, which is a very simple way to compost food waste. I just started that about a year ago, and it's been really fun to see the results and to see this compost that my wife uses on her flower beds. So it can be done in a city. We're going to talk about some larger composting operations today and some of the ways that Maryland is encouraging more composting to come in the state. I'm going to start by showing a web page here in the chat. I went and put a link to Maryland Department of the Environment's webpage on composting. And I'm going to pull this up right now just so that everybody can see what it looks like. Let's see here. Where is it? Okay. Let's hope the sharing works. We had some problems with it the other day. Okay, so this is MDE's composting webpage. And this webpage has a lot of information about the process of composting, the physical processes that are occurring. It also gives some information about permitting composting facilities in the state, as well as a lot of resources that people can look at and learn more about the process, as well as anaerobic digestion as well. It also has programs that different counties in the state have put into place to collect food scraps. And hopefully this will be something that more and more communities will start doing in the state. So I put a link to this in the chat. So if anybody's interested in looking at this page and reviewing it and seeing all the resources MDE has, I encourage you to do that and have fun. Go down the rabbit hole. There's a lot of links there that you can follow and learn a lot. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about composting with two professionals in the area. We have Kristie Blumer from Compost Crew, who's going to speak about their operation at Compost Crew and what they do in the state. And then we have Jason Browne from Denali, and he's going to talk about what Denali does with composting as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with Kristie, and I'll go ahead and share some slides with Kristie. And if you want, Kristie, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Happy Food Waste Prevention Week. My name is Kristie Blumer, as Tim said, and I am the Senior Director of Composting at Compost Crew. So I know we have a little bit of a small group today, so if you do have any other questions, feel free to shout them out. It's a great time to learn more about the industry, learn about you and what we're doing as well. So excited to speak with you all today. And while Tim's putting the slides up together, a little bit about Compost Crew and our company. We are a Maryland-based company. We are one of the first food scrap collection and diversion companies in the state. We started in around 2011, and now we're one of the largest food waste diverters in the state and the DC metro region. So we are excited to be able to share with you about ways to divert your food scraps, as well as composting either in your backyard, on your farm, in your garden, and also large scale as well. So thank you, Tim. You can get started. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. Perfect. So a little bit about our company. We kind of went through a bit of it, but we started collecting food scraps in 2011. And we partner with some amazing organizations in the area. So large size composting in the region. There's one in Prince George's County, Maryland, operated by MES, that we divert a lot of our food scraps that we collect to. We also partner with a new composting business out in Ballsford, Virginia, Free State Farms, who also processes composting at a large scale. And then also in Jessup, Maryland, there's a new anaerobic digester that just opened that we also divert some of our food scraps to. So that's where a lot of our food scraps are being collected and diverting to. But a couple of years ago, we wanted to try to create a more decentralized composting infrastructure. So what we as a state are reliant on are large centralized facilities. So we have to take our routes and our trucks, like the one you can see here, all the way out to these kind of farther areas, right? So a little bit of a more environmental, economical tax on that. So instead, we wanted to try to create these more small, medium-sized, decentralized composting programs. So if you can go to the next slide, Tim. The reason why is we wanted to try to reduce our environmental and economical tax, but also try to find ways to divert food scraps in a different method. So as we know, we want to reduce our food waste first, right? So don't try to, get as much food as we can. We try to make sure we're being as smart as possible when we get our food. And then we also want to utilize that food as much as possible. So like I learned you could use watermelon rinds and you can put them into your smoothies instead of having them to even go into compost or something else, right? Also, food that you have prepared, there's now ways that we can donate that based on a new federal law that allows for more donation of food. There's a lot of really cool apps out there now where you can get food for very low cost that would have then been thrown out. I think it's good to go, and there's some really interesting apps. We also wanted to find ways to partner with farms for animal feed. There are a lot of regulations on that. So if you are interested in that, make sure to check with the state and the local organizations about donation to animal farms. But there's some really interesting ways that we can divert our food to animals. And then of course, composting is an amazing ability to utilize the food that we can no longer eat or give to then go back into our soil before it goes anywhere else. So we definitely don't want it to go anymore into the landfill or incinerator. So you can go to the next slide. So we decided we wanted to make this closed loop solution focused on composting. So if we can't donate it to food farms or anything else, let's compost that material. So you can see in my virtual background, we wanted to create more on-farm or more decentralized sites. So what that means is something small scale, closer to large waste generators, where we could then get the food scraps from that local community, get it into a program that's, for example, on a farm, where we can then help that farmer compost on that space. Then that finished compost can go back onto the farm where they will hopefully have produce or whatever they're growing and make that high quality food from that high quality soil now back to that local community in an amazing closed loop solution. So then you can go to the next slide. So what we've decided is we've created these compost outposts. So what we've done is we've tried to create a way to focus on food scrap-based composting at this decentralized level. To do that in Maryland, there is a 5,000 square foot exemption where you're allowed to compost food scraps from off-site spaces, so from our community. We also compost it from the farm as well, so farm scraps. But if it's coming from off-site, you're now required to be below 5,000 square feet of area. So how do we maximize this space while creating this decentralized kind of scope, where we've created these compost outposts, where we've taken modified shipping containers that are locally recycled from Baltimore, and we modified them to be ideal aerated static pile systems. So if you compost in your backyard in a tumbler or on a pile, it's similar to a static space, right? So it's not moving around, but we're creating more air. This is an aerobic process. So we're trying to force air into a controlled environment. So there's pipes underneath these containers being forced into the pile at an ideal size. Density and the amount of porosity is really important for composting. So we make it basically an ideal place where the microbes that are doing all the work for our compost are happy and living up the life that they want in these spaces. From there, about 4 weeks later, we take it out into windrow space. So we're passively aerated windrow, then into a cure pile. And then depending on the location, we'll apply it as like a mulch on site on a farm or community garden, or we'll sift it and then compost it kind of like a spreaded space for a farm or community. And depending on the location, be able to use it as an additional revenue source for the farm or for our community members. So you can go to the next slide. So we've done this, we started this in 2020 and we're excited to expand it. It went really well. And so from 2020, we now have 7 different partners, all different types of partnerships. Another reason why decentralized composting is so great. You can have it really modular. You can make it in different sizes and shapes, low cost infrastructure, and you can get started right away. Right? A lot of large scale composting is hard to get started. It's, 4 to 10 years based on permitting and the amount of money and size and operators, right? So this is a great way to get your community started right away. So you can go to the next slide. So talking about benefits and challenges. So the benefits of these types of on-farm, on-site type of composting is that you really get close to the local industry. So one great example is we've partnered with a lot of local municipalities, one being the city of Greenbelt recently, where we communicate directly with the city, who communicates directly with their participants on what we can accept for food scraps. So these are some of the things that we can accept as a food scrap or a nitrogen source in our compost. And so we can get that direct line of communication. So there is a very low contamination rate. So what that means is things that are not meant to be in our compost pile. So that is really, really helpful as an operator, because then we can immediately take this material and process it instead of having to go through that material, because we go through every single bag or whatever is in those buckets or bins. We go through it to make sure there's nothing that is non-organic in those spaces. Then we can make this finished compost in a very closed loop solution. So we actually have a truck that goes in a very small city, picks up a bunch of food scraps in that city directly to a composting site in the city, where we then process it very fast into finished compost that will then go back to those community gardens and the community in that same city. I mean, it's like the most closed loop solution possible. It was very exciting to get this program started. So not only are you creating a way of managing this high quality nutrient source, but you're also having a more resilient city, right? We're not dependent on any large scale composting facility. What if that facility for some reason shuts down? We are fine as a city of Greenbelt because we have a system that is in place to be able to manage that, which is so amazing. So there's a lot of great benefits with decentralized composting. If you could go to the next slide, Tim. But there are some challenges. So let's talk about things that are non-organic that can get accepted with food scraps. So you have your your kid is helping take out the composting. They might accidentally put in their toy in that bin, right? Or sometimes it's confusing to the consumers. So there are a lot of greenwashing when it comes to food scrap recycling. So unfortunately, we have a lot of products that look green or say biodegradable or even say compostable, but they're not actually compostable materials, which is really confusing for the consumer. Also my staff, because you can go through the pile and you can see this green straw with no certification on it and be like, There's no certification. How do we know this is compostable? We'll have to put it into a different bin now. We can't process that. We also don't accept anything that might be organic, but is toxic. So an example of that is poop. Please do not give us poop. We are not a poop-based composting system. You can compost poop because it is an organic substance, but we do not accept it. So there's things like that, like tissues. Please do not put your used tissues into the pile. Any bathroom waste, just assume that's a no-no. Things like that we definitely need to get better at. So there's some challenges there. Also, on an on-farm and a decentralized system, we are at a very small scale. So there is some regulatory abilities that make it challenging to grow decentralized composting in Maryland. So more ways that we can create a higher size of input output would be very helpful for the farmers that we work with, to be able to have more of these sites on farms, to make this really an ability for anyone to be able to create a decentralized composting system. So there is some tricky ways of getting partnership involved because we're so limited in size. So that's a bit about our benefits and challenges and our composting program. So I think that's my 15 minutes, or 10 to 15. So thank you so much for your time. If you do have any questions, here's my contact. I love talking compost. I talk about it way too much. So if you do want to give us a message, please let us know. Also, just a little tag, in the Maryland area, there's a Maryland DC state chapter, specifically under the United States Composting Council. So if you want to get more involved in composting, I also lead our Maryland DC chapter. So feel free to email me if you're interested in joining us to help promote composting in the region. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Kristie. Great. That was some great information. What would somebody do if now you have circuits of home pickup that you do for subscription customers, or is that organized through the municipality that you work with?
Yeah, great question. We do both. When we started as a company, a lot of ways that we grew as a company was because of community programs. So it wasn't even organized by a municipality. It was one amazing community member that was like, I need to get my neighborhood started composting. And so they would call us and we would give them kind of like a bulk density discount. So like if everyone in our neighborhood got started composting, we could directly work with all of those neighbors. So they don't have to worry about exchanging money or anything like that. And we can get them started with a discounted program to get them started. But there's now a lot of municipalities that are doing it for the residents, which is an amazing program. So we have a lot of ones that are, more recent, that are smaller size, and we have some really big ones. So for example, DC just started their own curbside pilot. We also have some programs that we've been working with for a very long time, like the city of Chevy Chase, the city of Falls Church. So those have been doing it for a very long time. So their participants have been used to getting food scrap collection as part of their residency in those spaces. So we do both, to answer your question. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a small municipality. I was up in New York City the other week visiting my sister, and they have composting bins on all the streets right with the trash cans, and they're doing food waste diversion there through the whole city. So it is a feasible way to handle food waste, and it is a growing trend around not just Maryland, but around the country. So if anybody has any questions for Kristie, you can put them into the chat or wait until the end when we'll have an opportunity for people to click off mute and ask questions if they like. So we're going to go to our second speaker today, Jason Browne from Denali. And before, Jason, you speak, I want to just show a little clip of the kind of processes that Denali does. So let me just pull this up here. Whoops. I don't know why it's doing this, but one of those days. Yep. I breezed through it right before the meeting. So. We'll get there.
Yeah, it's probably tough to do the meeting video.
All right, I might have to. It's only a couple minutes, seconds.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Let me pause this. So, Jason, I'll pull your slides up, and you can just go ahead and pull it up. Let me get them here.
While he pulls that up, my name is Jason Browne. I'm the general manager for the Northeast region, basically Virginia to New England over to Illinois and Wisconsin. And I manage the food waste collections and the facilities that manufacture compost throughout that region. And this is Denali at a glance. We are nationwide. We're in every state servicing some type of organic waste. One of our bigger customers, Walmart. Anywhere there's a Walmart, we're there servicing them with their food waste and sometimes green waste. But in the bottom corner, as Timothy mentioned, we actually work with New York City on their organics program, help manage their compost facility in Staten Island, and they're expanding quite a bit with curbside collection. Walmart, Tyson, a lot of grocery service where if they can donate the food, they'll do that first and foremost, but that's not always possible. And we'll take the food waste that they generate and we'll take it to various outlets that we'll get into soon. But our goal is to do the hierarchy of donate first, then process if unable to donate. All right, next slide, Tim. So this is kind of a snapshot of what Denali handled in the last year. So quite a bit of food waste, 515,000 tons of food waste. Now, some of that food waste can go to land apply on farms. It can go to compost facilities. It could go to digestion. There's a lot of, or it can go to making some type of byproduct. But a lot of different uses for food waste. It just depends on the volume, the different types of waste streams. What's different with food waste is traditionally solid waste, everything goes to a hole in the ground. Recycling, everything goes to a MRF, and then it kind of disseminates from there. Food waste is very dependent upon logistics, where the closest outlet is, like Kristie was mentioning earlier, and what they can handle and how much they can handle. And composting is very much, it's going to be very tricky in some spots. Not all composters take food waste, and some take food waste, but are going to be very picky on what kind of food waste they can take. Some don't like meats because meats can attract vector, as in animals, or they generate odors that they need to avoid in order to be a good neighbor. And their contamination could be an issue as well. And contamination is not only an issue for the finished product, but oftentimes, especially with film plastic, even if it's compostable, will turn into a litter problem at bigger sites. And you could have an issue with that just as much as an issue of it not breaking down and composting correctly. So that can play a factor as well. Next slide. So when we're looking at food waste, I'll give you some images of the different types of streams that we get. One thing that is also tricky when it comes to food waste is the liquid factor. You're going to have a lot more liquid in food than you do in the solid waste or recycle streams. And as you get to the hotter months in the summer, that liquid factor will increase. So in composting, liquid is not a bad thing because we need a lot of water in order to compost correctly. However, we're having a very wet year so far, so it can be a problem when you already have a lot of water. And then you have what we call pre-consumer or post-consumer. So pre-consumer is more back of the house, the kitchens, the restaurants, or the grocery stores. It's getting put in the, before it gets to the actual customer. And then there's different levels of pre-consumer. Is it packaged food waste or unpackaged food waste? If it's packaged, we're going to have to handle it differently, and we're going to need more equipment to take the packaging off. Meats, again, like we talked about, it can be a tricky one with certain composting outlets. Fruits, vegetables, and bakery is usually the most common that we deal with on the commercial side. Less chance of contamination, less people touching the stream, more control over the stream this way. So we tend to focus our efforts on this where you can drive the most tonnage. We are probably the largest commercial food waste collection company in the United States. We don't do as much on the residential side as Kristie focused on. And so we touch a lot more volume with a lot less hands, because we do see that on the residential side, that's where the biggest risk for contamination comes in, because it's really hard to monitor or police the curbside carts one by one and making sure that people aren't using it as just another trash can, which we do see quite a bit of. The other stream that you'll hear a lot about is post-consumer. Again, this is more front of the house. So think if you're going to McDonald's, you have the kitchen waste, or you have, when you're done eating, what you put in the bin. That's what we would consider post-consumer. And again, you're going to have packaged versus unpackaged. Containers and utensils are, what is compostable is the biggest question in probably the compost industry right now. Denali is a very big advocate of the CMA program, Composter Manufacturing Alliance, where they have pulled together a lot of composters, and they're putting together programs that this is truly compostable. This will work in a windrow style versus a static pile versus their aeration pile. So we have the different levels identified, and we make the manufacturers of the compostables test their material in a real life environment and not so much in a lab. BPI is more lab driven, and so we've had issues with their materials breaking down properly. Post-consumer, again, it's really hard to control that stream more to make sure that contamination doesn't get through. So you have to be very specific, and the outlets that you go to are going to be very picky. And if they don't have the right equipment to process that material, which I'll show you here in a second, then they may not accept it. So just something to think about on the large scale composting outlets. Next slide, Tim. So on the top, the blue machine is what we call a tiger machine or depackaging machine. This is one of a handful of different equipment out there that can handle the packaged material. So what will happen is that you'll put that package in the top, and it'll come out looking like an oatmeal, like you see in the top right. So it's going to remove all the inorganic packaging, and it's going to send it to a different conveyor that will go into a compactor or trash bin. Now, where it gets a little tricky here is that machine can't tell between compostable or not compostable. It can only tell inorganic or organic. So even though and some people will ask, well, why do we want to do compostables if it's still going to get removed? The goal is that one day we don't need this machine, that everything is truly compostable and will break down in the system at any compost outlet. But for now, we need this machine. And this machine is going to run, the machine alone is anywhere from $500,000 to $800,000. And then the infrastructure, in addition to that, you're going to be pushing close to $1 million to install this machine. So it's very expensive, and you're going to need a pretty significant amount of tonnage to be able to justify that cost. So you're going to want to find an outlet if you're doing commercial side and you can't get the stream as clean as you need it to be. You need to find an outlet that will have this depackaging machine. And currently in Maryland, there is not a lot of them that I know of. At a composting outlet, I don't think there is one yet. I know Prince George's is talking about getting one. So if you are dealing with packaged waste, more than likely you're going to have to go to BioDevco, which is an anaerobic digester. And even though that's a digester and not a composter, those people still need to work hand in hand with composters or land apply companies, because their digestate still needs to be handled. So it's just a food for thought. If you're going to a farm outlet, which we do a lot of in Maryland, a lot of our food collection still goes to farm outlets. When you go to farm, you cannot feed meat to the farm outlets. So it has to be meat free. Again, that's where we focus on the bakery and the vegetables and the fruit. And even though composters can compost the meat, sometimes they turn it away. I don't think you're going to have that issue with any of the composters in Maryland currently that accept food waste. 100% of the food, fruit, vegetables, and bakery can go there. But again, if you're going to farm, this is part of their diet. So even the little stickers on the fruit or the twist ties that end up in some of these things can kill those animals. We have to be 100% clean. This becomes part of their diet. So if you're picking up once a week and you miss a service and you start going 2 weeks on a fruit in the middle of summer, it starts to turn bad. And that's also not good for any kind of animal, no different than it would be good for us. So it needs to be consistent on service in order to make sure that it's edible. Any of the post-consumer stuff won't go to farm, and it will need to go to either composter or digester. But again, you need that depackaging machine to help. Utensils tend to be a hard one. As Kristie mentioned, one of the hardest things for us as composters is deciphering what's meant to be compostable and what's not. I know in California, they've talked about some rules to where they're going to actually enforce what type of labeling they can put on packaging. That is not the case currently across the rest of the country, but I'm sure it will be discussed more in the years to come. The goal would be one day is that, if it says compostable, we define what compostable is. Or if they want to use some shade of green tint for all things compostable, that would be great. So no different than, we've struggled with trash and recycle over the years. You can go to one city and the trash can is pink, and the next city it's purple, or the next city it's black. And then, you could live in one city and work in another. So understanding what everybody's rules are can be tricky, but uniformity is key to our success in the future. Next slide, Tim. Training is required is probably the number one thing that we focus on, and that I'm sure Kristie has a focus on this as well. We're not only training the customer on what they can throw away properly, we're training the driver that picks it up. We're sometimes training the outlet, if it's not our own outlet, on what we're bringing and what we can bring and what we can't bring, or they're training us. We even have issues sometimes if we get a contaminated load going to a landfill. When you go to a landfill that's says there's a green waste ban or a food waste ban, we're trying to explain to them what contamination means and that we can't take it to the regular outlet. We need to go to the landfill because it's contaminated. So a lot of training required on all aspects of whoever touches the material. Waste streams are changing rapidly right now with what's acceptable and what's not. And then there's seasonality to some of this stuff. We see a lot of influx in the summer with the fruits. You'll see a lot of influx in the Thanksgiving and Christmas time when there's more food at home. And for us, we do a lot in the retail space with grocery stores or shopping centers in general. And those tend to have seasonal workers and some high employee turnover. So that's why we have to focus so much on training and making sure that we have the right things going into the right container. Next slide, Tim. So regulations, it plays a big factor. Obviously, we all know about the Maryland regulations saying that, now that regulation in Maryland is focused on a radius of the outlet. And oftentimes we're in a very decentralized model, as Kristie mentioned in her presentation. So just give you an example on a large scale. I have 2 trucks that service the entire state of Indiana. So this is not similar to a trash or recycle company that park 50 trucks and do a 100-mile radius. We'll park 1 truck and do 150 to 200-mile radius. So it's very decentralized. And the reason for some of that is, almost everybody has trash and recycle, but not everybody needs food waste. Not every business needs a food waste container or food waste services. The hotels, maybe the restaurants, but not everybody needs it. So we don't have as much dense routing, or, maybe 1 out of 10 people we drive by needs that service. So we deal with that, as well as the lack of outlets. We need more outlets everywhere across the country, especially in Maryland. We don't have enough to really be efficient. So it makes us drive farther away to find an acceptable outlet for some of that. Now, when you're hauling food waste, some of the rules apply differently depending on the state you're in, are you considered agricultural or solid waste, or, you know, some of it's regulated by the town, some of it's regulated by the city, some by the state, some all three. So you just have to be very careful if you're going to get into the collection side or processing side, that you have the proper permits, and that you're following the rules correctly. And again, contamination plays a factor into some of that as well. What I'd actually like to see is that instead of a radius around outlets, we should talk about just availability of the service. If we do a 5-mile radius around an outlet, and making that mandatory, but then I'm driving right by all these customers, even though I don't go to that outlet, or there isn't an outlet within 5 miles, I still can offer that service, and we can still be collecting that food waste. So I'd like to see it more evolved around just available services instead of outlets, because we do go a lot farther in our industry than the typical landfill or MRFs. But the good news about these mandates is they do spark infrastructure, and some of the talks like the one we're in today, these weren't happening a year or two ago because it wasn't as important. So we very much value that. And I think talking about it is going to help us a long way in getting more infrastructure, more outlets available. But language is going to be further defined, I'm sure, as we get more along. That we start out with a very vague language, I think, on purpose, but I'm hoping we can define it more. For instance, if there's only one outlet, what's a fair price if the outlet gets to charge whatever they want, right? That was one of the comments made by some of the customers. So I think some of that definition will help go a long way on helping people like Kristie and I on the collections and processing, on being able to drive that business more. And then lastly, just the infrastructure and the permits needed is very expensive in composting. Very, very expensive. Takes a long time to get all your ducks in a row with engineering, but the stormwater controls, the surface requirements in Maryland are very, very strict. And so that can cause delays and also hinder some of our infrastructure that we need to get more locations online. So next slide, Tim, was that it?
Yeah, I think that was the last slide.
So that's it from a food waste collection and composting side. And I can't stress it enough. We need more outlets. We do a lot of driving, hundreds of miles a day unnecessarily, that even sometimes going to out of state locations because there isn't viable options within the state. So I know that's where Kristie and I are focused on with the board and trying to get more people in the know. But we need more help.
Thanks, Jason. That was some great information. And you saw in the video some of the large composting operations that Denali does. And that can be very tricky to find spots to set up those kind of operations. So that's
and a
one
lot
of
it
the
takes
issues.
It takes public-private partnerships in a lot of cases for that reason, to find the real estate and to get it permitted and accepted. Neighbors play a big factor. Not usual to put a compost facility right next to a bunch of homes, but we love to be next to landfills and some of these outer areas where we have space. But yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, we hear a lot of issues with the packaging too, and basically, if people are wondering what that means, so basically, if a grocery store is getting rid of a package of hot dogs, let's say, and they send it to a composter, there has to be a way to remove that plastic packaging from the hot dogs, or that any kind of wrapping from any kind of food product, because that's a contamination in the compost. So I guess what your depackager does is basically squeezes the food out of the plastic, and that's why it turns into a mush when
think
comes
of
out the
like
land.
a paper shredder. It shreds it first, and then it's a washer machine after that, and the organics push out through the holes, and the organics stay in there and go to a different outlet. And where it gets really tricky, and you're going to see a lot of it, I'm seeing it spread across the nation right now in a lot of states, is that collections, we're trying to combine food waste and green waste together. But when you do that, these depackaging machines cannot handle branches and leaves and anything else. So if you collect the food waste and green waste together, We then have to, by hand, separate it to then put it through a depackaging machine. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense, other than it's one less truck on the road, which I think is important, right? When we're talking about sustainability and costs. I am seeing some townships, Connecticut has been one that I've seen push it more. They're having the green waste put in a bag, or the food waste put in a bag that's then put in the container with the rest of the green waste. And then they're able to grab the bags easier and then debag it through the depackaging machines. I think that's a better idea than just loosely combining food waste and green waste together, because I just don't see that as a long-term viable option. It will, the mass contamination that we're going to be dealing with, because we're not going to be able to separate it. And that means that we're going to have to deal with that packaging and that plastic after the compost process. And by then it's usually too late. It's going to make it into our finished material.
Yeah, packaging is a big, packaging of food is a big concern. And there are a lot of organizations out there trying to develop methods to use compostable packaging. I was just at a conference and I heard there was a candy bar, Mars. It was Mars, and in the UK they are wrapping their candy bars in paper wrapping right now to try to increase the compostability of the wrappers. So that's something that organizations are looking at, because I guess plastic contamination, is that your biggest issue with food waste, Kristie and Jason?
I would say, yeah. When it comes to food waste, plastic is one of the worst ones. I mean, one plastic bag, to put it into perspective, can contaminate 1,000 yards of compost per se, because you grind that bag and it turns into 1,000 pieces. And there's no way to get it out after that all the way. You can try and screen it, but it's still going to end up to some degree in the finished product. And nobody wants plastic when they're trying to buy mulch or compost. Kristie, would you agree? Or?
I would definitely agree. Plastic is number one, the worst contaminant. It can be put in the material, in food scraps and yard waste, in a bunch of different ways, right? There's so many different types of plastic, especially the light lined material. I mean, very hard to decontaminate with any type of piece of equipment. So definitely plastic is number one, the most readily available contaminant that we've seen.
And we get that ick factor a lot with food waste. You're going to hear a lot of people talk about, hey, I really want to use liners, right? So liners keep things clean and easier to transport in some cases, but it's almost oxymoronic that we're trying to be green but then we're using plastic liners, right? And then even if those liners are compostable, again, as soon as they go airborne, it becomes a litter problem, and we're starting to really get away from that as much as possible. There's a lot of services out there that will clean containers, or you line if it's a household container, smaller, if you line it with newspaper, it works really well for odors and absorbing, and a brown paper bag will work very well. They hold up pretty well. But we have to get away from the plastics. Now, plastics does very well from the manufacturing side because it keeps their goods dry and airtight, and preservation makes a lot of sense for them, but it's causing havoc on the back end for us. And there's only so much that we can do. And then if you're talking about a tonnage and you're talking about spending $1 million for a depackaging between the package system and then the concrete and the building and the power supply that you're going to need to actually run it, you need a lot of tonnage to be able to justify that, or you're spending a lot of money per ton. Which is how on the private sector we have to look at it. Does it make sense to spend this? Are we going to be able to spread this out over 100,000 tons or 10,000 tons or 1,000 tons? Right. So in order to, on a large scale, we need to be able to justify it. And it's hard. It's very expensive. Now, the good news too is you have a lot of companies that are really pushing for this. Our customers are pushing for depackaging quite a bit because the labor they spend unpackaging at the store, or the fact that they're not able to hit the diversion goals. This is the only way they're going to get there, is if they can start including packaged goods. So they're going to help drive that market a little bit more and hopefully spread out the costs more. Walmart has been doing this for a long time. They don't really talk about it much, which is surprising to me, but they probably do more than most companies in the U.S., and they're pushing for depackaging On our side, they want us to pick up packaged food waste and find homes for it. And I've been scouring the country for anybody and everybody that has one of these machines. And there's not a lot of them out there. So then there's more coming in every month, but we need more of them in order to get the footprint that we need.
I think for people and businesses that are just starting to compost, I think that's one of the issues that one of their main concerns is the containers, if you line them or not. If you have a food waste container that is unlined, you would have to clean out that container every time you empty it. And if you have certain liners that you can put in there as well, making sure that the liner is the right type is often confusing. If you look on grocery stores and advertising these days, because green is so popular, I guess you could say these days, you'll see a lot of claims about liners being compostable or biodegradable or natural or plant-based, and all these different terms that
That's a
people
great
say.
point.
Yeah. And Kristie, what did you say that Compost Crew looks for in as far as what kind of certification a bag should have in order to be truly compostable?
Yeah, great question. So unfortunately, federally, there isn't a certification that has been approved throughout the board. Like Jason said, we just don't have enough consistency throughout the nation on when it comes to composting. However, what they've done so far is there is an ASTM standard for the physical breakdown and the biological breakdown of composting that is approved for specific products. But it also needs to be field tested and also safe. So unfortunately, a lot of the ASTM standards don't include a lot of the new technologies and understanding of compostable products like PFAS and things like that, where it should not have those types of chemicals that are very dangerous. So we've done BPI certified compostable because they do field testing and ASTM standard and PFAS required to not have in the product. But also, like Jason showed, CMA is also a great organization in the nation that does the same field testing with ASTM standards. So if it's certified, unfortunately, as a consumer, it's very confusing. So I highly recommend you talk directly to your collection and or composter, because they will tell you the direct information that location can handle. So like Jason said, even if it's organic, your end product might not accept it. So for example, like I've said, poop, right? So you can put that in your sewer and DC will compost it through a composting method, right? And as well as use tissues.
Baltimore as well, yeah.
Baltimore as well, right? So that is a composting program that technically will accept that material. We will not. Like Jason said, some places don't accept meat. Compostable ware as well. Some places won't accept any compostable ware, even if it is certified. So I highly recommend you double check. I will say one additional thing. If you are a person that is with a compostable collection program that does accept liners, please don't tie your liners. It's fun because some people say, like, like you could be like taking out your trash, you're like, tie it up, I don't want to see it. And then you like throw it into a bin so it goes far, far away. You don't have to think about it again. For composting, we have to mix this material directly with our carbon sources. So if it's trapped inside of a compostable bag that breaks down at a different time and scale and type than all the material inside of it, then it will not break down and be a homogeneous mixture with the rest of the material. So we have to physically open up every bag. Very time consuming. Please do not tie your compostable liners if you're in a composting program, because it just makes it so much easier for us to see the material, decontaminate, and mix within everything else if it's not tied.
So, and I'll add to that too, Tim, is it's not getting talked about enough, in my opinion, but what we're trying to desperately get the message out is we want the food. That's all we really want. We don't want the compost. They don't add any value to our compost. The only value that compostables bring is that we get the food with it. But in reality, we'd love if you just scraped the plate, or you did, lined it with newspaper, like we said, because then that can all be composted. But everything else, there's a big fear that it won't break down. can't decipher between what's compostable and what's not. And then in all reality, all we want is the food.
Yeah.
So the more we can push programs to focus on that, I think the better off we're going to be. So we don't end up in another recycle market like we did with the China problem. If we just focused on paper, cardboard, bottles, and cans, we'd be better off. But we try and grab everything, and then we have these 20% plus contamination rates that we fight.
Yeah.
If we had 20% contamination rate on the compost side, we'd all be out of business.
Yeah.
We're lucky if we can handle 1 to 2% by weight on contamination in a compost environment, just because it's so hard to get out of our process. It's not going through a MRF with high-end technology that can pull it all apart. We're doing this stuff by hand, like Kristie said. There's not a lot of technology out there for us to get this stuff out. We're doing it the hard way, and it takes a long time to do it. And if we just focused on collecting the food and not everything else, we'd be in a lot better shape.
Absolutely. I mean, education is a huge part of trying to create a more circular economy. I mean, people are trying to do good, but the information might be misleading. You know, marketers, they try to market their
plant-based, like you
products.
said, very misleading when it says
Plant-based or,
plant-based.
you know, biodegradable, but they, you know, 100 years biodegradable or something.
Yeah.
So that's something that is trying misleading. Here at the MDE, we deal with the Chasing Arrows recycling sign. Anytime somebody sees that on a plastic item, they get the impression that it's recyclable. And so they would include it into their curbside pickup, let's say. And really, it's, you know, a lot of plastic is not recyclable, at least curbside. So that's a contamination. And so education is a big part.
And then
so
anytime you're doing single use.
Yeah, single use.
Sustainable, right? Like the goal is that use plates and silverware that you can wash and reuse. It's reuse, reduce, recycle. So the last piece is recycle that. And that's what we're trying to focus is turn the focus to food. And that's what we really want.
Is you know, big advertising thing is compostable cutlery. And I know you mentioned this. Is there any standard as far as utensils, or is that something you want? That's something you just want to avoid altogether.
I mean, if it means that we're not going to get the food, we can't avoid it, right? Because we need the food, right? So much of what composting is, it's carbon and nitrogen. Yeah. There's not a lot of composters out there that are lacking on carbon, but we all need more nitrogen. So that's why we want the food, is because we need that nitrogen to really make a good compost. So we're going to do whatever we can to work with that stream in order to get that nitrogen. But at the end of the day, if it's made out of some type of compostable, it doesn't add any value to our process. And if anything, it's hard for us to differentiate, is that truly compostable? We won't find out until it's at the end, which is 6 months later. You know, we won't really know until we see it disappear.
Yeah.
And that's tough. That's what's hard for us and then it's too late to go backwards at that point. We've dealt it. We got to deal with it now.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my preference when I start doing it, and I did this in Ann Arbor recently, I did it in Phoenix a few years ago, we're really trying to go fiber only. And what I mean by that is more of the wood-based utensils and the paper plates and, you know, paper liners and stuff like that, because 2 reasons. 1, it doesn't go airborne and cause litter issues as much. Once it gets wet, it kind of stays there. And 2, it blends in with our compost if it doesn't break down all the way. Or 3, it really does break down faster than the plastic compostables or in that sense. So if we push more towards fiber, I think we'll have a better chance. Now, again, it gets tricky because you go to the molded fiber, and that's where you start getting into things that are not compostable. They're using resins and glues that are not compostable and can be harmful to ours. They've kind of cut out the PFAS. That was a problem a couple of years ago. There was a lot of PFAS in compostables. They've cut most of that back now. I don't hear that as an issue anymore. The manufacturer stepped in pretty quick. But we need the food and not everything else if we can help it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Tim, I'll just add also, just like Jason reiterated, this is Food Waste Prevention Week. So hopefully you are all working on reducing the amount of food that you are wasting, no matter how it's being wasted, either by throwing it out, or also if you don't need to compost it, right, donate it. If you don't reuse it in a different way and fun recipes. I'd like to add Food Waste Prevention Week, but also Compostable Waste Prevention Week, right? So why have these extra compostable wares when you might not need it? So for example, K-cups. Oh my, do I not like K-cups, right? So there are ways for the same machines.
Those are those little coffee cups.
There's little
Right.
coffee cups with
I know,
coffee
use
in
them.
there. Right. So let's do that instead this week. Let's also do ways like tea, right? Like use your, loose leaf tea instead. If you go to Starbucks, go with your own reusable cup, right? So let's reduce our singleware as well this week. That would be my add-on.
Yeah. Is coffee grounds and filters okay?
So yeah, technically yes, if it's paper-based, but sometimes they're lined. And with new things, right?
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate.
Coffee good, liner bad.
Yes,
yeah.
right.
You see that a lot when there's paper packaging. Is you don't realize that there is a very, very thin plastic lining on the inside of that paper that is used to prevent moisture and air travel through the paper. And you think, oh, it's paper, I'll just put it into my compost, but there is plastic in there. Yeah. So just the last thing here. I'm sorry, Jason.
Just
go ahead.
One more thing too. Just like there's a lot of phonies or imposters on the compostable side on the products. We're seeing a lot more of that pop up too on they call them composter units at either in the household or in the commercial side.
Yeah.
They do not actually compost.
They're dehydrators. Basically.
They're just dehydrators. And then they have their soil amendment after that. And they're not always pleasant to deal with on the back end. So if you come across that, ask your question, is it truly compost? Does it meet PFRP, pathogen reduction? And is it, we're seeing that a lot more everywhere. So.
Yeah. Just as a last item here, I wonder if both of you could just speak quickly to, have you seen any change in your business since the food diversion law came into effect in Maryland?
I'll let you go first, Kristie.
Yeah, we've seen a little bit, but not a huge change. We love that there is more understanding. The best part of the law is there's more people talking about it. So hopefully it'll continue to drive individuals to, divert their food scraps, which is definitely needed in the region. But to answer your question, not as much as we would like. We would love more.
Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, not as much as I was hoping for. Hasn't been a truly big spike. I think a lot of the people that wanted to do the right thing were already on their path to do it. Now it's more about educating those about the laws and what resources are available. Again, there's not a lot of outlets. So even though we have that law, it's not capturing a lot of businesses because they don't fall into that radius. But if we were able to expand that language into available services, people like Kristie and myself could really go after that business and educate those customers, put the education on us as the vendors. I mean, we're more than happy. We have the team to do it. But the language, the way it is right now, doesn't spark the growth that we need, unless more infrastructure is going to happen. And I can tell you that we're years away from a lot of infrastructure because of the process and the funding that it takes.
Brad, you had a question?
With that being said, if you know of a organization that you think should be diverting based on HB 264, we would love to visit them.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to increase your business as much as possible.
So,
and then I question for you, Brad, too, is that as a state level, what are you guys seeing, doing, hearing on more infrastructure?
Well, there was a law this past year that was going to provide some funding for that. The funding, unfortunately, was taken out of that. So it's something that we're going to work with the delegate and some of the people who are working on that to see how we can fund that. We did come out favorable with amendments on that particular legislation. We were thinking that that was going to bring in something like $14 million of revenue as how it was currently laid out, but now we're going to have to work through that next session.
Well, if you're open to it, I know Kristie and I would love to, from the USCC chapter side, love to talk to you more about that. Ideas that we could maybe brainstorm on.
Yeah. And I showed this, and Jason, I don't know if you saw the chart that I showed at the food summit. I know Kristie did.
I did not, sorry.
Yeah. So each year we report in our recycling report, essentially, the number of years of landfill capacity, essentially. And right now, and we take that for the numerator, it's in tons. It's kind of weird to express it in tons, but there's a conversion factor in there. The number of tons that landfills can accept divided by the number of tons that landfills received in the previous year. So what that doesn't take in, so if you do that, we have about 21 years of landfill capacity. That doesn't, when you just take one point like that, it doesn't take into consideration population growth. So when you do more of like a trend analysis, we only have about 14 years of landfill capacity in the state of Maryland, which when I first did that was pretty
alarming.
Yeah. And Maryland is a popular state. More people are coming. And so there's regardless of where the investment comes from, there needs to be investment in diversion. And if you public or private, and if you have to drive the material further, if you're going to dispose of it, let's say Blue Ridge starts to get some more, then that's going to cost more as well. If there's not as many options, prices are going to go up as well, just because there's less competition. So it's definitely something that we are starting to talk about a little bit more. Yeah, 14 years.
Yeah, it's not a long time. And I'll be honest with you too. I've talked to quite a few municipalities, not just in Maryland, but a lot in Maryland as well. And I can understand some of it, but most of the focus when it comes to food diversion is on the residential aspect.
Yeah. And
but I can tell you that's not where the tons come from.
Yeah.
So when you look at the price per ton, it's astronomical on the residential side. But the driving numbers on the commercial side, which I can give you a ton of information on that too. But that's the hardest part. But like and I'm not talking ill on anybody, but like I work a lot with Howard County right now on their organic stuff, and they're expanding, but they're still only going to accept residential.
Mm-hmm.
So and then I work a lot with Millersville, and they've talked about maybe doing something residentially, but they don't have any appetite for commercial. So more and more people I talk to, and the voters come from the residential aspect. So I understand that. That's where the volume comes from for the political side of it. But the tons come from the commercial side and industrial side. And then we're having to go farther and farther away, like you said, to find outlets.
All right. I'm going to have to cut in here because we're a little bit over. I appreciate people staying on. I will say that if we encourage residential composting and people diverting their food scraps, that means that the public perception for businesses is going to be they're going to have to do it as well. There'll be more impetus, I guess you could say, for businesses to have to do it as well. But Jason and Kristie, I want to thank you. This was a great presentation, and I encourage everyone to, you can view, like I said, we'll put this on YouTube, and if you want to view it again, please, you're more than welcome to do that. Visit MDE's webpage, and you can see more on composting, and just be more knowledgeable about the things that you're able to do with food scraps. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll hopefully talk to you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.